one of the questions that we get throughout the season are about mushrooms and slime molds. As with all of our diseases, mushrooms are going to be very dependent on the environmental conditions as to whether or not they're going to proliferate and come up each year. In general, mushrooms prefer periods of prolonged humid weather. And after we have maybe a week to 10 days of that conducive environmental conditions, then we'll actually see those fruiting bodies come up out of the ground. And those fruiting bodies are the mushrooms that we all know and love. Another type of fungus that we have in our landscapes will be slime molds. And while these are very similar to mushrooms, there are some differences. These slime molds will typically show up shortly after a rain, survive for 2 or 3 days, and then as soon as it dries out, they'll just kind of blow away in the wind. One way to think about mushrooms is almost to think about an iceberg. And so the only part of the iceberg that you're seeing is that little bit that's above the water. Same as with mushrooms. The only bit of that fungus that we're seeing is the little bit that's above the soil line. And so even if we're not seeing mushrooms in our garden or in our landscape right now, that fungus is still alive and well in our soil, breaking down wood and doing some of the other things that we love our decomposing fungi to do. Now, unfortunately, there are some mushrooms that are poisonous. And especially if we're dealing with little children or pets or other small animals in the yard, and you may want to be wondering, how can I best remove these mushrooms? Now, the best way to take care of mushrooms is really going to be to hand pick them or just mow over them with your lawnmower. Unfortunately, fungicides tend not to work too well in controlling any sort of mushrooms. And the reason for this is that a lot of these mushrooms, the fungi, will actually be surviving maybe 6 feet down in the soil profile. And it's going to be very difficult to get any of that fungicide or any of that product that far down through the soil profile. If we are looking to control these mushrooms in our yard, one of the best things that we can do is to have a nice, vigorous lawn. And what happens is especially when we apply fertilizer, the turf roots become a little bit more active, and now they're going to break down any woody material in the soil much more quickly. That woody material is the same material that our mushrooms are feeding on. So if we have a vigorous, well-fertilized lawn, that should help prevent any mushrooms from occurring in the future. Now, one of the other questions that we always get is, can I eat this mushroom? And unless you are 100% positive and you have a lot of experience foraging and doing mushroom identification yourself, we do not recommend you eat any mushroom that you find in the lawn. There are a lot of lookalikes that can look very similar, and so we can have poisonous mushrooms that look almost the exact same as perfectly edible mushrooms, and we don't want any mistakes to happen.